to the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. College football week 4, the topic on the docket today. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we get into the games, a perfect time to remind you, head on over to FanDuelSportsbook.com/bet the board. Take advantage of all the generous sign-up bonuses FanDuel has just for you, whether it's a $1,000 free bet, whether it's a 30-1 price tag on Monday Night Football between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Dallas Cowboys. There are plenty of ways to watch that bankroll grow, and FanDuel has you covered. Just remember, Bet the Board is your promo code. And Payne, another week of college football in the books, and yet another week without a dominant team atop the college football landscape, in my opinion.
This is good. Everyone was anointing Alabama the national champion after beating Miami, and I was digging into some of those numbers. It's like, hold up a little bit here. They're having some issues along the offensive line. Bryce Young can't possibly be this good under pressure for the rest of the season. That's got to regress a little bit. Now, I will say the first half, it's 21-3, and you're like, oh, okay. This might be the team. But I was stunned just watching Florida pull off that comeback with Emory running the ball down their throat. That's something that we haven't typically seen a Nick Saban defense just get bullied in the trenches.
And the one thing about Alabama coming into that game, we thought the defense was going to be their strength. Now, whether it was them taking their foot off the gas or Florida making adjustments, you have to give credit to the Gators as you did there. But I think what we're seeing for some of these programs, Payne, whether it's Ohio State on the defensive side of the ball, Alabama on the offensive side of the ball to some extent, or Clemson's offense that appears stuck in neutral, a lot of these Power 5 programs that had a ton of defections to the NFL aren't able to reload as quickly early on in the season as some of these Group of 5 programs that essentially brought back 20, 21, and in some cases like Toledo, 22 starters to fill out their rosters.
You're spot on. And the one thing that we said when we released our initial Bet the Board top 10 was, I really want to see what Georgia looks like when they get healthy on offense. And I saw Pickens return to practice this week. So that team becomes extremely interesting for me moving forward if they get the parts healthy on offense, because we know the defense is the best in the country. But all of these teams have holes. DJ right now, we saw some inaccuracy last year, and that has just been a huge problem. I mean, he's third worst in QB fault incompletions so far to start the season among Power 5 quarterbacks. Ohio State's defense right now among Power 5 defenses, second in the most explosive passes allowed. So these teams have some holes, and we've kind of alluded to that throughout the way. After that performance from Alabama, things look pretty wide open. The only question becomes is you have a Nick Saban team with like 37 coaches and analysts. You would think at some point the talent's there along the offensive line. Is that a unit that we kind of see mature as the season goes on and they kind of fix that hole? I know you aren't in love with some of their weapons, but they have some 5-star young kids out there that, again, I think as the season goes on and progresses that they become a little bit better. But so far, there's really no clear-cut dominant team that's looked the part every single week.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, and rightfully so, when you see Alabama boat race Miami out of the gates, you go, okay, you look through Alabama's schedule and you figure Ole Miss could be a potential speed bump. Hey, look, maybe it's a trip to College Station to take on the Aggies. And now suddenly the Iron Bowl looks a lot more intriguing as well, knowing that they're going to have to go down to Jordan-Hare to take on an Auburn team that, in my opinion, will probably only get better, and acquitted themselves quite nicely with that daunting road task into the whiteout in Happy Valley last weekend. So should be in store.
What'd you think of that game?
You know what? I watched it, and I have to give Penn State credit. And I've been reluctant over the years to give James Franklin anything he does with that program a ton of credit. He put his players in a position to not make the big mistakes. And I think you saw some of the maturity from Sean Clifford there. I like the fact that Penn State defensively was able to get backed into a corner, and they came out swinging. But at the same time, I don't want to discount anything I saw from Auburn because, we went into that game going, we weren't sure what we were going to get from Bo Nix. Bo Nix, in my opinion, wasn't the problem. It wasn't like Auburn beat themselves. Penn State went out there and beat them. And I think both teams should be optimistic about what they showed on that kind of stage.
Completely agree. And the difference maker in that entire game was Mike Yurcich. So you don't have to give James Franklin a bunch of credit because Mike Yurcich is not going to be there long. He's going to be a head coach in college football here pretty soon, and he deserves all the credit for the improvements that we've seen from Sean Clifford. That was the one thing we outlined last week. It's like, hey, we're not going out there worrying about crushing Ball State. We want Clifford to go through his reads, go through his progression, so when we step up in class, he's going to feel comfortable. And he's been a completely different quarterback under Mike Yurcich.
Yeah, I think the Big Ten as a whole, from top to bottom, becomes one of the more intriguing leagues right now because Ohio State, as you mentioned, extremely vulnerable with the explosive pass plays. And when you're giving up more than 400 yards passing against a Tulsa offense that looked like it couldn't do anything to get out of its own way in losses against UC Davis and Oklahoma State, yet the Scarlet and Gray is the perfect cure-all, that raises some red flags. Michigan has been one of the most dominant teams. Now, I know they haven't played a grueling schedule, but I have a sneaking suspicion that win over Washington is going to look better and better as the season goes on, and they've blown away odds makers' expectations. Penn State, from a resume standpoint, has the two best wins of any team in the country, going on the road, winning at Wisconsin and beating Auburn in their own building. And while I've been critical of Iowa, hey, look, you found a way to beat Iowa State. You're going to get tested, not this week against Colorado State, but next week against Penn State. And I'm not writing off Wisconsin for dead, despite some odds makers dropping them to as much as 12-1 to win the Big Ten West. I think you're going to be in for a battle every single week in the Big Ten, unlike some of the other Power 5 conferences that are out there.
It was interesting. I was just kind of combing through Penn State's schedule last night, and all of the teams that you would expect them to beat look like they're improved, and then the toughest teams, like in Ohio State, looks like they're not as good as we initially thought, but that's an absolute gauntlet of a schedule for Penn State the rest of the way.
Oh, they'll have their hands full. I mean, if they're going to go and accomplish big things this year and put together a 10-2 record or maybe even something better, they will earn every single one of those victories. So good for them to get a little bit of momentum going. We'll see if they're able to maintain it, and we'll figure out exactly what we're looking at, because I don't think we have a dominant team right now, and maybe a little bit more parity atop the ladder than we've grown accustomed to in the past. I think it's only a good thing for the sport rather than seeing the perennial blue bloods run away and hide. But speaking of blue bloods, Payne, let's go out to Norman, Oklahoma, where it's the Oklahoma Sooners welcoming West Virginia. Oklahoma, of course, outlasts Nebraska last weekend, winning the game 23-16. The play that you'll see circulated over and over again is Oklahoma's defensive back making a one-handed pick, although the smarter play there would have been to knock it down to save yourself about 25 yards of field position. But hey, look, that doesn't get...
You wouldn't have been in the highlights
exactly.
all week,
That's what I'm saying. You can't put that on the
You've
reel.
done the same thing in your Turkey Bowl.
Oh, I mean, I ought to do whatever I can, but I probably would have been in the hospital there because I would have hyperextended my shoulder trying to make that kind of play. 16.5 the number at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on the game, 56.5. These two teams did not play a season ago. When you look at West Virginia, 0-10 on the road against top 10 teams since 2000. They've lost those 10 games, Payne, by a combined 212 points, or an average of more than 3 touchdowns a contest. You look at the last 2 trips they've made to Norman, they've lost those games by a combined 66 points. When you look at Lincoln Riley, there's no doubt this week of practice wasn't going to be fun for the Oklahoma offense. It was an program low under Lincoln Riley's leadership with just 23 points. Spencer Rattler, 7 touchdowns this year, but 5 of them have come in the win against the Western Carolina Catamounts. Season low, 214 passing yards. And I think the biggest questions right now, concerns about physicality. You're not seeing enough running back from the quarterback position. But I was blown away by this stat, and it was from Oklahoma's 24/7 webpage. In 14 games at Oklahoma, Marvin Mims, the team's best wide receiver, or at least the guy who's supposed to be, has caught a grand total of 9 passes in the second half. And I think, Payne, when you look at it, it speaks to some of the issues that we've seen from Oklahoma in the second half. But when you break this game down, is there one particular matchup that you think is going to define the outcome?
So you are spot on with Spencer Rattler. He's not providing what the previous quarterbacks have with their legs, but he's also been horrific pushing the ball downfield with the deep passes. So the explosiveness hasn't quite been there either, and that's a difficult thing to do when you don't have the ground game with your quarterback, and he's also struggling with his accuracy over the top. When I broke this game down, I thought the other side of the ball was a little bit more important. I thought the key factor was West Virginia's offense. Now, obviously, I think we both love Letty Brown. And last week, 180-plus rushing yards against Vaught Tech. He's obviously really important. And he's going to be against Oklahoma. But when I look at the Sooners' defense, been very dominant against the run. Number 2 in rushing success rate allowed among Power 5 schools. Roughly 25% of runs have graded successful against them. West Virginia really hasn't been an efficient running team the last few seasons, and I know they've had like a little scheme shift there where it was a lot of outside zone, now it's inside zone. Neither worked. And so Letty Brown typically is just banging his head up against the wall, though he did have a nice 80-yarder to start the game against Vaught Tech. But the Sooners have allowed negative 0.17 EPA per rush, top 20 in the country. And so, for me, I think it's all about the pass game. And that's going to be the biggest key factor to this game is, can West Virginia move the ball through the air? That's despite the highlight reel interception last week. The Sooners have been pretty poor defending the pass. And so I think if you're going to keep it within the 16.5, I just don't think that's going to be possible here. So you're going to have to move it through the air. Oklahoma feels a little vulnerable right now on the field, a little messy off the field and in the locker room. So I think something that he is really good at. He's cerebral, right? Like he knows where the ball needs to go within the offense. He can deliver it there accurately. Oklahoma's played Tulane, Nebraska, Western Carolina. I wouldn't call that trio of offenses like elite through their weapons, but Oklahoma right now 112th in EPA per pass allowed. Oklahoma's secondary was kind of the one part of the defense that we had question marks coming into the season. We knew they lacked size, but they had to replace Trey Brown, they had to replace Trey Norwood, and then Brendan Radley Hales transferred to Washington because he's a Vegas kid and wanted to be back out in the West Coast. And I guess Todd Tate Martell couldn't recruit him to UNLV, couldn't bring him home for you boys.
Hey, you know what? There was a Tate Martell sighting over the weekend. I'm not quite sure how he's going to get integrated into the UNLV offense. And what was a Iowa State home game, I think UNLV in the first had 18 yards of total offense. So little to say, our program's got a long way to go, Payne, before we're going to be relevant on the national landscape.
So, Jared Dagey has to step up here and really play his best game of the season. He's not off to the best start, but there's going to be opportunity here. The receiver group needs to step up. So far, pretty slow start from guys like Ford Wheaton, and we expected Winston Wright to surge after adding even more weight to his frame this offseason. But through 3 games, his production's down just 1.4 yards per route run, despite the ADOT increasing 3 yards. But the one thing Dagey does very well, spread the ball around, right? 6 guys with double-digit targets already. One of the weapons has to step up. And if West Virginia's offensive line can hold up, I think there's going to be some opportunity through the air for West Virginia here. You
know what's interesting about West Virginia, and Neil Brown didn't shy away from it. You've seen him insert a more mobile quarterback as a secondary pitch of sorts in Garrett Green. And what was surprising to me, not the fact that he got reps against Long Island when they blew them out in the wake of that Maryland loss, but Green was the one out there trying to seal up the game last weekend when things got awfully squirrely against Virginia Tech. And, there obviously are some challenges from an offensive game plan when you're building it out, trying to figure out, okay, what kind of plays can we structure for 2 guys that don't have the same skill set? But at the same time, I wonder how much we do see Green as the changeup guy, because to Oklahoma's credit, they were pretty good in terms of using Nick Petito last week as a spy against Adrian Martinez.
Yes, and I think in a game like this, it's a little different just because the Sooners' front is so athletic and you're probably not going to run on them, but throwing up a changeup every now and then, a curveball, probably makes some sense. I think the biggest takeaway here for me, Todd, is I'm texting you in the late stages of that Virginia Tech game, and you're claiming that you're not watching it, but you are fully entrenched.
I went back and watched.
Yeah, he doubled back.
No, I didn't watch in real time. I recorded it, and I didn't want to try and sweat it out. Full disclosure here.
Hold on a second. You're watching Vaught Tech games on Rewind?
Well, I had to go back and watch the fourth quarter to see exactly what happened, because that was a game where he split the first half total, didn't get there, and the full game total, and wanted to make sure the handicap wasn't completely off base. So I had to go back and watch the fourth quarter play out. And let me tell you, Payne, I'm glad I didn't watch that game in real time, because seeing a screen pass get intercepted and then a goal line stand to try and get you to the window with an under 50.5 ticket probably wouldn't have started my Saturday the way I like to start the weekend.
No, but at least you had that rush late with the opportunity and a chance of a victory.
Fuck that rush. Everyone says, I need a little bit of rush in these games. No, I like to win all my games 73-0. I'm not in it for the rush. I'm in it for a rocking chair.
I agree. And fortunately, I was able to sit in the rocking chair because I had first half under in that game. But by the way, I appreciate you. We're going to have to now alert our producer to mark this one with cuss words, so all of the 9-year-olds out there can't listen.
I think I only have 1.5 a season, so I'm now going to have to be more judicious with my use of 4-letter words as we move forward. But you know what? We're moving forward. And actually, you know what? Before we close the book on that Big 12 game and get to another one taking place in Austin, I wanted to ask you about the number here. When you look at Oklahoma, a modest 16.5 point favorite, we have seen some money come in on the under in this game. Do we start to get the feeling that this is a potential buy low spot for an Oklahoma offense, or is the market more or less suggesting, hey, look, there are some legitimate concerns with what Spencer Rattler has going on there?
Yeah, I have seen some under come in on this game, and it's just because of what you said there and what we talked about at the top before we even broke this game down. It's Spencer Rattler. He's just not pushing the ball down the field accurately and efficiently, and he doesn't provide the oomph in the ground game because of his size and stature. So you're looking at a Lincoln Riley offense that hasn't quite been up to snuff. Now, West Virginia's defense, we called for some regression when you lose your top two guys in the secondary who transfer out. You lose a big man in the trenches up front to the NFL. And so this isn't quite the West Virginia defense that we've seen in the past, but the under to this point has been sharp because of those limitations to Oklahoma's offense. And offensively for West Virginia, probably not able to run the ball, although they still try. And we have seen Jarrett Doege not having the best performances to start the season, a little down compared to where he finished last year. So it's kind of a two-pronged thing here with this under.
Yeah, going to be interesting, too, to see what Lincoln Riley's patience looks like, because it's not as though there is an absence of talent in the quarterback room. When we look across the national landscape, I don't think it's too big a reach to say we had two quarterbacks transfer out, Tanner Mordecai to SMU and Austin Kendall, Louisiana Tech, who at least through the early portion of the season, putting up better numbers than what they're getting from Spencer Rattler. All right, to Austin we go, Payne, where it's the Texas Longhorns welcoming in Texas Tech. You're looking at Texas, an 8.5 point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game is 61.5. And what's interesting, when you poke around on some of the local publications, they're calling this the biggest game between these two programs since the Michael Crabtree catch back in 2008. Matt Wells hasn't exactly been good against in-state programs, compiling just a 1-5 record against TCU, Baylor, and Texas. Last year, though, Texas Tech had Texas on the ropes. Down, up 15 points. It was Sam Ehlinger leading the ridiculous 15-point comeback in the final 3 minutes and 13 seconds before Texas won 63-56. Meanwhile, Texas, they bounced back from a disappointing performance against Arkansas, the largest victory the program's had since 2005, and absolutely destroying Rice last weekend. When you look at these two teams, though, I think coming into the season, Payne, for Matt Wells, he had a quarterback he believed in Tyler Shuck. This is going to be his first test, and to be quite honest, I'm not sure the Texas secondary has been tested by either of their first three opponents.
You're spot on. This is a game that you want to talk about. You were banging the table for Texas Tech, Texas talk here.
Hey, Matt Wells, he's our guy. This was a team that was polarizing coming into the year. It was crazy, and I know we talked about it, and there's a lot of guys that we discussed some of these things with. I'd seen them power rated as low as in the high 60s, low 70s by some folks, and there were other people that I respected that had Texas Tech as a top 25 team coming in. This is the kind of game that goes a long way in terms of validating those preseason ratings.
Yes. Very serious response. I was leading up to a little story or joke here, but
oh no! If you got a story, or joke here, go for it.
We have. It's more of a story.
Oh.
We have a loyal fan base that's new this year that are huge Texas Tech fans, alumni, and I'd been speaking with them throughout the last couple years online, and then there was an event this summer that I attended. And we just started randomly talking, and somehow we knew some of the same people in that Texas area that were part of the business on the other side. And so we had to discuss this game because I sent a text message to those guys and said, hey, we're going to be talking Texas Tech for the first and probably last time all season, so you're going to want to tune in here. They are very high on Texas Tech. They think Tyler Shuck's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and very optimistic there. And so far that we have seen some early Texas Tech money come in, taking this from 10.5 down to 7.5. But you're spot on. This game is coming down to Tyler Shuck. There's a reason he had to transfer out of Oregon, and it was because he wasn't very good throwing the ball. And I think that was ultimately the biggest question coming into the season for Texas Tech was the pass game. Shuck hadn't really shown an ability to be accurate. Started 7 games for the Ducks. 4 of them were tragic in terms of his ability to throw. Shuck was bottom 5 in accuracy rate among Power 5 quarterbacks last year. Now, when you parse through some of the numbers, he was good with RPOs because that doesn't really ask quarterbacks to do all that much, right? It's like just be a one-read decision maker and get it there accurately and don't piss down your leg. But Shuck was one of college football's worst passers on any other throw type in terms of accuracy in the entire country. Bottom 5, actually, in accuracy in non-RPO throws last year. But he's been pretty good, and I know you've kind of hinted at the competition not being overly daunting to this point, but he's been solid. 84% adjusted completion percentage when he's kept clean, 9.7 yards per pass attempt. And the biggest thing, he had some turnover woes at Oregon. So far, just 2 turnover-worthy throws in 3 games. He's been more respectable under pressure. And you put it all together, Texas Tech right now, number 6 in the country in EPA per pass, number 1 among Power 5 offenses in passing success rate at 60%. Now, obviously, you do have to factor in the schedule. FIU is barely inside the top 100 in defensive efficiency, 103rd in EPA per pass allowed. Houston's strength defensively this far is against the pass. Average defense overall in efficiency, but 17th in EPA per pass allowed, and Shuck had to kind of come from behind in that Houston game. Stephen F. Austin, respectable FCS program. Now, you kind of hit this perfectly. The Longhorns defense, this is going to be their toughest test, I think. And, they're obviously not the 85 Bears, but in terms of like Power 5 programs, Texas is 5th worst in passing success rate defense, 56th in overall in EPA per pass allowed. That was a unit that we thought transitioning to this 4-2-5 was built to stop the pass a little bit more. And so far, I just don't think they have the horses to play that. There's also a transition period in terms of changing defenses and how effective that can be on the early part of the season. I do envision Sonny Cumbie using lots of play action in this game. Shuck has been crushing it with the play fake element, 137 passer rating, 10.6 an attempt. I think you want to get Shuck comfortable early in this game. Make sure Eric Uzakuma, is that the right pronunciation there, gets out fast.
I know it's pronounced better. I know it's pronounced better that way than Jason Kelsey, so you're good.
Yeah. That's Jason Kelsey, man. He was flying.
He was meandering his way down the field on Sunday Night Football.
So, you want to get some of your horses involved early, help Tyler Shuck get some confidence early in this game. Listen, I think when you look at Uzakuma, just seems to be a good guy, right? Just like the ultimate grinder. Put on 40 pounds since his freshman year. Didn't really have an ability to handle press or man coverage until last year when he broke out. I think he's got to be dominant here. Great start to the season. 4.6 yards per route run for him. So it's all about getting Shuck comfortable early in this game. And if you do, I think you have a chance to at least stay within this number. And so far, a lot of the guys who bet early in the week that don't bet a ton of money but certainly have influence have come in on the Red Raiders here.
Yeah, I'm real curious to see how this goes because I watched the Texas game in its entirety against Louisiana early on, and Levy Lewis wasn't able to really do a whole heck of a lot testing that Texas defense. And to be quite honest, the Texas defense never really had to worry about the passing game of KJ Jefferson against Arkansas because Arkansas was able to do what they wanted to when they were able to running the ball. So this will be the first time that Texas's secondary, as you mentioned, is going to be tested. And I think this will be one of the more fascinating games as we begin to try and identify who is going to represent that second tier in the Big 12 or maybe a dark horse threat to the Oklahomas and to the Iowa States in terms of conference supremacy. So an interesting game to watch. From the Midwest, Payne, it's time to head to SEC country, though, specifically Gainesville, Florida, which was almost the scene of the biggest upset of the early portion of the college football schedule. This time it's Florida welcoming in SEC East rival Tennessee. You're looking at Florida, a 20-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. This total sits at 63. And I guess the biggest question that we have to ask in regard to this game before we get your take on the matchup that's going to define the outcome, the Gators lose last week to Alabama. I know we touched on it at the top of the show, but they outgained Alabama 439-331. They erased that 21-3 deficit. Florida's now won 15 out of 16 in the series. Tennessee's only win during that span came in a 38-28 victory in 2016. Tennessee hasn't won in Gainesville since 2003. How do you go about potentially incorporating the heartbreak or a look-ahead element or something along those lines, even before you dive into the X's and O's, figuring out if Florida can rally the troops for a game against the Vols where Tennessee comes in off a de facto bye and a confidence-building win against Tennessee Tech?
This may piss some people off, but is burnt orange? Is that what's the color of Tennessee and Texas? Isn't that pretty similar?
Texas is burnt. Texas is officially burnt orange. Tennessee is a little brighter shade. Dare I say it's bet the board orange that they've stolen from us.
Gotcha. Gosh, I hope you don't. I think we're a little more efficient than those guys. But
we know not to play Joe Milton in a game of this magnitude. Let me tell you that much.
Oh, it does sound like Hooker is going to be out there.
Well, they're hiding behind the injury to Joe Milton. Just come out, Josh Heupel, and say, hey, look, Hendon Hooker gives us a better chance because he actually has touch on his passes.
Yes. Okay, so the number here is not that far off. I mean, we'd make it like 17 on a neutral, night game in the swamp, rivalry game. Like, the number's not too far off, but I think ultimately we saw the early 21.5 get nabbed. 20 was kind of the consensus market open, and we're coming off that a little bit just based upon this spot and situation that you've alluded to. When you go out and take Alabama to the brink and just come up short, and the energy you had to exert there, the physicalness, playing a bigger, faster, more physical team definitely can wear on you a little bit, but there is some confidence factor there, and it just ultimately comes down to Tennessee not throwing up on themselves. You mentioned the previous domination in this series, and Tennessee is a team that I think we've attempted to back a few times, and maybe it's a little different with Heupel and in a different scheme and quarterback. But they haven't really shown well in some of these bigger stage games. I mean, I remember we went to the well last year, I think, with Georgia, and in the first half, they looked like they were fully entrenched in that game and then just didn't show in the second half. So it'll be interesting to see if they have the horses here. But the number certainly, I think, in the situation does have some value, and that's kind of why we've seen this thing ticking down.
When you look at the matchups where the Vols have to be great, Florida, at least through the first couple of games of the season, they've run for more than over 1,000 yards, the highest total through 3 games in the last 40 years for that program. They're second in the FBS in rushing yards, 246 rushing yards that they accumulated last week against Alabama, the most allowed by the Crimson Tide in 7 years. Florida, to their credit, they've gained at least 400 yards offensively in 13 straight games. It's now tied for the second longest active streak in the nation. You talked about Emory Jones. We know about AR-15 who dealt with the hamstring. But the biggest storyline for what's going on in Gainesville right now, Payne, it's got to be Malik Davis and what he's able to do at the running back position for a team that could not run the ball to save its life a season ago.
It's so interesting because I thought they were a better running team when I looked at them metrically than a lot of people, and I was a fan of Malik Davis. This is good on good here, right? Florida's run offense 10th in the country in EPA per rush. Tennessee's defense 7th in the country in EPA per rush allowed. So something has to give. Now, obviously, Emory Jones being implemented and creating that extra man advantage in the box, using his legs. We thought the offense was going to be better running the ball than, with a statue and a pocket passer and Kyle Trask back there. Now, clearly, Florida is way more battle-tested in this area of good versus good. If you can bully Alabama and enforce your will and churn out 6.2 a carry and 7 explosive runs and a 57% rushing success rate against a Nick Saban defense that we had projected to be one of Bama's best in the last couple of seasons, you can do that against anyone when you're kind of fully entrenched in the game and have some level of focus, and we'll see if that ultimately is the case here. But I think that's the big question, right? Can you match that physicality back-to-back weeks? Can you play at that level? And it's probably really difficult to do. Tennessee's great defensive run marks do come against the likes of Bowling Green and Pitt and Tennessee Tech, all run offenses outside the top 85 in EPA per rush. So the Vols have played a pretty soft schedule of run offenses, but they've been dominant. Let's see if they can negate the ground game a little bit here. This is their Super Bowl. It's a week after Florida played their biggest game. Anyone that I think plays Florida at this point, the whole goal is to get the ball out of Emory Jones' hands. It's that simple. Make him a passer, sell out to stop the run. Even from a clean pocket last week against Alabama, 5.5 yards per pass attempt, 77 passer rating. For the season, 34 of Emory Jones' 77 passes have been inaccurate. Now, if you're Tennessee, not only do you have to stop the run, but I think this is the week where you have to prepare to play two quarterbacks. We saw Anthony Richardson doing a running cartwheel turned into a backflip before the Alabama game. Gators claim his hamstring wasn't ready to go. My gut says Dan Mullen, who, great offensive mind, like give him all the credit in the world. He thinks very highly of himself. Smartest guy in the room kind of guy. My gut says he didn't want to risk AR-15 on an Alabama game that he didn't think he had a chance to win, and that became further true when you're down 21-3, and then all of a sudden you are battling your way back, and Emory Jones is just crushing it. And so I think that's kind of what unfolded there and why we didn't see Richardson.
You know, it's interesting. Florida's said all the right things all week, but you do wonder, even though it's a conference game against a big rival, although you wouldn't know that by a 15-1 record the last 16 years within the SEC East, how they can run it back. So I'm curious to see on that particular side. But a couple other games, not to go off on a tangent, that I think are worth highlighting in the grand scheme of things for folks that look for situations. Fresno State, a team who comes into this week playing a bad UNLV team, laying a massive number. Let's see what they bring to the table. BYU, a team that's now had 3 straight wins against Pac-12 opponents. They get a layup on paper before they take on an in-state rival in Utah State, laying more than 3 touchdowns. Georgia State, maybe they get Auburn at the right time. And then the one team that we talked a little bit about that had their hearts broken last weekend, Louisiana Tech, loses to SMU in the final play. Let's see if North Texas can take it to them. Just a couple of things you may want to factor into your handicapping, as I know our listeners will dive deeper into some of the other games on the board than what we can cover just on Wednesday's show. All right, Payne, little trip to the Big Ten. East Lansing, a site of many a horror that we've had week winning outright as a 6.5-point dog. 21-0, they outscored the Canes late. They have a little bit of a trickier game, at least in my opinion, on paper, than I think a lot of people are giving them credit for. Michigan State will welcome in Nebraska. Michigan State is a 5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 52. Nebraska, well, they held Oklahoma to their season low in yards of 408. When you look at the Sooners' 23 points, that was the worst versus an unranked opponent in a non-conference home game since they scored 10 against TCU in 2005. But the road has not been kind to Nebraska. They've now lost 12 straight road games versus ranked opponents going all the way back to 2011. Their last road win versus a ranked opponent, that was Penn State Week 11 of the 2011 season. But when you look at how Nebraska has performed, they could have easily let the season go off the rails. With that season opening loss to Illinois, you bounce back against Fordham and Buffalo, look dominant defensively. But they're playing a team that I think has been one of the biggest surprises so far in all of college football. Michigan State 3-0, average margin of victory 22 points. And the Spartans find themselves ranked for the first time since October 5th, 2019. Payne, it's been all about Kenneth Walker on the offensive side, but you have to imagine Michigan State's defense is going to do everything they can to take away the legs of Adrian Martinez.
That'll be the key to this game. And what's really interesting for me is that after the Illinois, he said, fuck it. I'm just going to go out there, have some fun, and play like there's nothing to lose here because fans were calling for his job. And I've seen a different quarterback since then. Martinez has been friggin' electric. And Nebraska was able to kind of build some confidence offensively against Fordham and Buffalo. You had back-to-back games with a 100-yard rusher and a receiver in the same game. 67% of Nebraska's drives last week at Oklahoma qualified as productive. So all signs right now are pointing to Scott Frost's offense looking like we thought it could coming into the season. The matchup in this game that is huge is Adrian Martinez and Nebraska airing it out at national stage. But after 4 games, Nebraska right now, 21st in the country in EPA per pass. Over 52% of passes have graded successful. That's roughly 12% above the national average. Adrian Martinez is number 1 in the country in explosiveness over expectation. Obviously a small sample, but it's really interesting to see him kind of mature a little bit as a passer. As great as the Spartans have been, right, 3-0 straight up, 3-0 against the spread if you got a good number on Youngstown and you got out early in that game. 2 of the 3 wins, obviously outright as underdogs. Everything's going just great for Mel Tucker and Michigan State, but the weakness that they have shown is in the secondary. They gave up 6 explosives to Northwestern. In total right now, Spartans defense 83rd in EPA per pass allowed. when we broke down Nebraska last week, we talked about their pass catchers being a little bit banged up. Some guys were out. Other guys were playing at less than 100%. The unit's getting a little bit healthier. Tight end Travis Vokalek is back. I listened to an interview. This is when you know you're going down a wormhole, is when you're listening to like tight end number 2 do interviews during the middle of the week. But I listened to an interview of his Monday night, and he said, basically, now that I'm back, our offense is going to be a little bit more multidimensional with how we throw. We can use more 12 personnel and throw from 2 tight end sets with me and Austin Allen out there. There's only one Spartan linebacker with more than 50 snaps that's graded out positively in coverage. Maybe, this is where, we see Scotty Hazelton shift Michigan State's defense to this 4-2-5. Maybe that shift helps, right? One of the safeties can focus on Allen, and whether it's, Xavier Henderson or Angelo Gorse, like both Sparty safeties have been pretty good in coverage. Maybe that's how they try to combat the 2 tight end sets. You look at those 2 safeties, they've been targeted 17 times combined, 9.3 passer rating allowed. So maybe that's how they handle a little more 12 formation that Nebraska to this point hasn't shown a bunch of. But ultimately, this is going to come down to Adrian Martinez being able to move the ball consistently through the air, and that's been Sparty's weakness. He's also going to have to make some plays on the ground, because that has really been the strength of this offense. It hasn't been really just handing the ball off to the running backs. It's been Adrian Martinez. He's got to be able to use his legs. But ultimately, for them to go on the road and pull off this upset, it's got to be about Nebraska's ability to pass the ball through the air. I think you said off air, Todd, and correct me if I'm wrong, little banged up in the running back room for Nebraska. Maybe it was their backup running back. Yeah,
they do. They lost, I believe his name is Gabe Irvin, as I scroll through and try and figure out. And while you look at his statistics overall, he hasn't exactly been dynamic as a bell cow carrying the ball. A lot of the folks around the Nebraska program call him the best back in terms of pass protection. So you wonder how that adjusts what Nebraska wants to do. But you talking about 2 tight end sets, it may negate some of that deficiency there, potentially, at least for this game.
Yep. And so that'll be interesting to see, is what does Scott Frost do? But having the ability to be multiple when you throw the ball, it should be a little bit of an advantage here. And we, haven't really seen a ton of that on film. We got a glimpse of it last week against Oklahoma. But I think this ultimately comes down to Nebraska's ability to move the ball through the air. Defensively, obviously, have to key in and focus on the run. But I think if you're looking at this game from the side perspective, it was interesting to see a little early Sparty money. I thought the opener there was pretty indicative that Nebraska might have a chance. Let's see ultimately where this closes. But if Adrian Martinez in the pass game is able to be efficient here, I think they might have a chance.
Not to put you on the spot here, because I know Brad Powers touched on it in our Bet the Board pregame show, which I encourage all of our listeners, if you haven't already done so, go over to YouTube, search Bet the Board, click subscribe. That show is available for you every Friday at noon Eastern during the course of the college football and NFL season. Brad talked about upgrading Michigan State. I mean, they've been one of the bigger surprises there. You talked a little bit about where this number opened. Before the season, Payne, suffice to say that we'd been talking about this game right around a pick'em, even with accounting for home field advantage given a night situation in East Lansing?
Yes, that would have been roughly the number before the start of the season. So we have seen that adjustment. And, to start the season, obviously, you lose as a 7-point road favorite. And Michigan State's come out like gangbusters, winning on the road at Northwestern as a dog, even though there was sharp money there. We've had to make some adjustments. And, for 3 straight weeks, Michigan State has seen an uptick in our power numbers. Now, Nebraska has also seen an uptick in the last few weeks. I believe we bumped them off the top of my head about 1.5 points for the performance, 1.5 or 2 points for the performance at Oklahoma. But ultimately, if you have a situation here where Michigan State is half as good as you've bumped them or 75% as good as you've bumped them, there's going to be value in this number. And obviously from the offseason, there's been a pretty large adjustment. When you open 3.5, it was pretty telling to me that line said Nebraska's the side here. Obviously, we're now out to 5. Let's see if this is a little bit of a maneuvering in the market, and we ultimately see Nebraska at a touch better number come in here closer to camp.
Yeah, I'm as curious as anyone, because when you look at it, and I think it's always important to kind of assess this early in the season, a big win that you at least thought week 1 can oftentimes change. And Michigan State absolutely embarrassing Northwestern in their season opener. At the time, hey, great. I'm not going to discount it at all. But after watching Northwestern play against Duke and watching Northwestern against Indiana State, suddenly that win doesn't carry as much luster, and we haven't been shy about sharing our disdain for Miami. Michigan State, of course, was in a 17-17 game. They used a 3-touchdown explosion in the fourth quarter, and ended up winning the turnover battle there +4. So in my opinion, this is Michigan State's biggest test to date. Let's see how they go out and if they take care of their business. Those are the 4 games where we tried to highlight, a single factor that'll be integral in trying to define the outcome. More importantly, who will be the victor where the point spread matters. Great time to remind you as well to follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. But I think, Payne, a lot of our listeners are going, man, what the hell? You guys glossed over the 2 biggest games of the weekend. Au contraire, we wanted to save the best for last. And we'll go to Soldier Field, where Wisconsin and Notre Dame will do battle for the first time since 1964, Payne. Schools, mind you, that are separated by a grand total of 241 miles. And we know about Notre Dame's longstanding rivalry with a number of Big Ten programs. Wisconsin would not fall into that particular bucket. You're looking at the Badgers, a 6.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game, 46.5. Brian Kelly comes into the contest trying to break the all-time wins record at Notre Dame, surpassing Newt Rockne. Jack Cohn matches up against his old program. But before we get into the X's and O's and try and figure out what'll play out on the football field, how do you begin to try and quantify what an early season bye could potentially mean for a Wisconsin team who's only played 2 games, but now has 2 weeks to scheme for a Notre Dame side that's shown some early season vulnerability?
Absolutely. I think it's massive in this situation, especially when you have some familiarity with Jack Cohn returning against his old team. Is this going to allow Jim Leonhard on the defensive side to come up with a wrinkle or two? And so, typically as a team, you would prefer your bye in the middle of the season just for health factors and kind of a regrouping of things. But when it's positioned like this and ahead of a big game, it's absolutely a little bit of an advantage that you have to factor in.
And when you try and figure out where Wisconsin is going to go, is 2 weeks enough to fix everything that's been problematic for this offense that does not have a single touchdown pass through the first 2 games of the season?
That's ultimately the big question, right? I mean, the Badgers' offense against the Irish defense, it comes down to a couple clear-cut things, right? What is Marcus Freeman going to do schematically? He has lived in too high coverage and dared teams to run the ball. I get it, right? That's the new cool Brandon Staley thing to do. Take away the pass, force teams to be less efficient running. That approach did not work against FSU, who has a well below average offensive line. The Seminoles ran for almost 7 yards a carry, 7 explosive runs. They were good down to down, 51% of runs great successful. Against Toledo, Dame's run defense was a touch better. And last week against Purdue, Notre Dame's defensive front was outstanding, right? Even when Notre Dame played with 5 guys in the box, Purdue averaged 1.3 yards per rush and a 0% success rate. Your hope is that Marcus Freeman doesn't think that's repeatable against Wisconsin's, rested offensive line in a ground game that's been very good, down to down. 51% of Wisconsin's runs have been successful. Now, the ground game isn't nearly as explosive as it's been in 2019 and earlier when you actually had good running backs.
How dare you? How dare you not compare Ches Malusi to the likes of Ron Dane and Jonathan Taylor that have come before him?
Yeah, I mean, Melvin Gordon. I mean, he's not on that level. He's obviously a 4-star recruit, had to transfer out of Clemson, but
I wonder what Monty Ball is up to these days.
Yeah, that is true. Now he's certainly better than what Wisconsin had back there last year. But, I mean, there just isn't that pop. The second thing that will be interesting here is if Marcus Freeman kind of smartly elects to put more guys in the box and force Graham Mertz to beat him, can Graham Mertz do that? And I don't know the answer to that. I would lean towards no. I think I've probably been the guy kind of leading the surge that Graham Mertz isn't that dude, but we'll ultimately see. The receiver group needs to be a little bit more consistent. Can you threaten a defense deep and open up room for the ground game if Freeman decides to throw a bunch of bodies in the box? Through 2 games, it's a resounding no. 112th in the country in EPA per pass for Wisconsin. Through 2 games, Graham Mertz has thrown the ball 20-plus yards downfield just 5 times. Hasn't completed a single ball. When you play teams like Eastern Michigan and kind of what we discussed last week with Penn State and Mike Yurcich and Sean Clifford, those are the games where you want to like work on things to improve for the future. Yet 71% of Mertz's passes were behind the line of scrimmage or short against Eastern Michigan. That's just kind of like surviving. It's not really like, hey, like we're going to try to work on things for the future. So they're basically coddling the kid in games where you should be trying to grow his confidence and expand his game. So when you step into situations like this against Notre Dame, he doesn't, just throw up all over himself. The third thing that'll be interesting here and probably decides who covers is Wisconsin's red zone offense. It has been horrific. Only 42% of plays inside the red zone have grade successful. For a run-first team, that's, kind of startling, right? This isn't Cliff Kingsbury air raid that might struggle in the red zone. This is a ground and pound team that typically their advantage is bullying you up front, and you would think that would be magnified, around the 20. Wisconsin's had 10 trips to the red zone. 5 of those trips, they've come away with 0 points. 4 touchdowns, 1 field goal. They even gave up a pick 6 in the red zone once. Graham Mertz doesn't get you in the red zone enough to be inefficient when you actually get there. So those are the things to watch for here. I'm interested to see what Marcus Freeman elects to do because I think he's got to change things up. I don't think you can play with 5 and 6 defenders in the box against Wisconsin. Anytime you prepare for Wisconsin, it's got to be a run-focused approach, and I think that's only become more magnified this year when you have a quarterback that has not shown an ability to threaten you through the air or even beat you deep.
It's a big problem. There's no doubt about it, especially when you watch UMass chuck the ball all over the Eastern Michigan defense, something that Wisconsin wasn't able to replicate the week before. You begin to wonder how they'll go about attacking in space. Now, the one luxury Wisconsin does have, even if their offense bogs down, is a defense that's truly elite by whatever standard and metric you want to try and use. Jim Leonard, 2 weeks to prepare, should be the season debut of Leo Chenal, one of Wisconsin's more talented linebackers. He led the team in sacks, quarterback hurries, and tied for the lead in tackles for loss with Nick Herbig a season ago. We know what Jack Sabenworm brings to the table. This is a Wisconsin defense who's going to make life miserable for everything Notre Dame wants to do on the offensive side. And when you look at the Irish's ground game pain, Kyron Williams this season, if you back out 2 carries, has averaged 2.7 yards a pop. Good luck trying to get on track against this Wisconsin defensive front if you can't protect Jack Cohn and he's not able to keep that stop unit honest.
Spot on. The question we had coming into the season with Notre Dame's offense was the O-line. They were replacing 4 or 5 starters. 4 are now on NFL rosters. I know the sample size is small and the talent is there. It's just young. So your hope is with experience that the improvement kind of comes throughout the season. But that question mark that we had, it's kind of been answered, and the answer is it's a big freaking problem up front for the Irish. Now, maybe their second string left tackle plays this week with Michael Carmody. That could help some. He played week 1 at Florida State, got injured. He was questionable all last week leading up to the Purdue game, and instead they went with their third string left tackle. So there could be a little bit of a boost there. But bottom line, Notre Dame's O-line is not creating any push in the ground game, even though you have 2 NFL backs in Williams and Tyree. The Irish are 121st in EPA per rush so far. The O-line hasn't just been bad creating push for the ground game. Jack Cohn's been running for his life. Now, a lot of people are saying, hey, he holds on to the ball too long. That's why the pass protection hasn't been great. Maybe so, but he's been pressured on 41% of his dropbacks the last 2 weeks against Toledo and Purdue. Relatively speaking, 2 good defensive lines, but nowhere remotely close to what Wisconsin's front 7 is. And both those games were at home. Now you might have, a little louder venue there at Soldier Field and, maybe some communication issues, but I just don't understand why there hasn't been that push up front. That's the real scary part when you have that much talent, even if it is young. The one thing Wisconsin's defense has done at an absolute elite level with Jim Leonard is stopping the run and making it one-dimensional. No different this season. Wisconsin's number 2 in EPA per rush allowed. Only 17% of runs have graded successful. That's the best mark in the Power 5 by roughly 8%. So it is going to come down to Jack Cohn in a revenge game, being able to throw over the top
revenge.
And create some explosives.
Huge revenge. Lost his job to Graham Mertz. Jack Cohn had this game circled.
This is the one you had circled. And that is the one area where Wisconsin's been a little bit vulnerable the last few seasons because they're so aggressive, right? Maybe Cohn can diagnose things before they happen. Cohn had a presser this week, and he said something interesting. It was kind of one of those like, I'm not sure if this guy's got something up his sleeve. He's so evil, right? He basically ended the press conference with, this is going to be a huge challenge for us. But I went against this defense in practice for 4 years, so I know what they're going to do. And I left that like, maybe he knows something I don't. Maybe this is like going to be like the game of his life. But what's interesting to me, and kind of doubling back to what we discussed at the top, is let's see if Jim Leonhard takes a different approach defensively. And maybe he's not so aggressive this week. If the Badgers can stop Notre Dame's ground game with 6 and then get pressure with their front 4 like Toledo and Purdue did, Leonhard then can keep more guys in coverage. Throw a different look at Jack Cohn that he didn't see for 4 years at practice every day. That could be something to watch for, and because you had that bye week, you have the ability to implement a few more wrinkles in a game like this. You also have to wonder if Jack Cohn's dislocated finger from the last possession of the Toledo game is, bugging him a little bit. He has worst passing performance of the season last week, 29% passing success rate, 5.8 yards an attempt. Did miss a lot of those intermediate throws, and they were credited to him being inaccurate. I also know the Irish receivers had 5 drops. It was ugly through the air altogether. You had the long Avery Davis and the Kyron Williams passing touchdowns. That's what basically kept Cohn's EPA numbers respectable. We touched on Purdue's secondary last week, Todd. We said this is a pretty veteran group, but it is something to think about that this finger issue might be something that looms even this week.
Yeah, I think the one thing that surprised me a little bit was Notre Dame's inability to get their best offensive weapon involved in the win against Purdue. Now, they were able to cover. There was a drop touchdown pass. You mentioned some of the other drops that were there, and a lot of the momentum plays didn't go their way. The defense rose the occasion, but Michael Mayer needs to catch more than one ball for 5 yards when you step up in class after compiling 16 catches through the first 2 games of the season. So it'll be interesting to see how they can get him involved, force Wisconsin's linebackers not to be able to play downhill, but to respect some of that passing game. And I think that's the matchup that all of us, as we tune into this game, want to watch. It's that Notre Dame offense. Can they correct some of those protection issues that have plagued them through 3 weeks against the Wisconsin defense that's getting healthier? We know they're ferocious and has 2 weeks to prepare. I have a feeling in this contest, we're going to know pretty early on at Soldier Field which the right side is in this particular football game. Last but not least, Payne, we head down to Jerry's World for the other ranked matchup of 5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 47.5. The Aggies have dominated this series. They've won the last 9 games. 5 of the last 7 have been decided by one score. Last year, a bit of an anomaly given the pandemic that they didn't play on a neutral site. It was a double-digit victory for the Aggies in College Station. When you look at Texas A&M, Payne, I think a lot of people haven't realized that this team has now won 11 games in a row overall, the longest winning streak for the program since 1992. But if Jimbo is going to live up to that lofty contract extension and all that oil money he's got in his pockets, he's got to win this game and start to build more momentum, knowing the schedule only gets more difficult. But let's start with the number here, because early on it appears we've seen a little bit of an appetite for the underdog taking this price off the key number of 6.
Now, do you know if his recent raise was an actual cash, or did they just put an oil rig outside the front lawn that just kind of pumps?
I mean,
for the rest
I think
of
they
life?
just.
How does that work?
I think they just put the rig there, and back a couple of months ago when commodities were trading at an all-time low, before I had this monstrosity I'm trying to build in my backyard, I debated filling a giant hole in my backyard with West Texas oil. So Jimbo's probably got barrel stacked upon barrel. I just hope it's done safely so it doesn't create a fire hazard in front of his home.
If I had your money, I'd burn mine.
Oh, here we go. Here we go. Says the guy who lives his life sleeping on a mattress.
All right. Stop it. Let's get to the game.
All right. Last but not least, when you look at Arkansas, hey, they've achieved their highest ranking for the program since 2016, scored 38-plus points for the first 3 games in a season since Bobby Petrino was walking the sidelines back in 2011. Payne, when you look at Texas A&M, it's the Zach Calzada era. Do we expect him to have some success attacking an Arkansas?
For Arkansas's defense, I almost went. From what I have seen so far, there's a reason the quarterback battle was overwhelmingly. Calzada has happy feet in the pocket. I don't know if you've watched, but
you can't
That is true. I mean, the happy feet were just going in the Colorado game. He does have a tendency to throw late over the middle and in between the boundary. He's had a turnover in each of the 3 games he's played. Now, do give him some credit because he battled through the Colorado situation, took his team on a game-winning drive, and he was just kind of thrown into the fire there. Pulled off a win. You also had the win and cover against New Mexico last week. He was good when he was kept clean. 138 passer rating last week, 89% adjusted completion percentage, averaged 10.5 yards an attempt. Jimbo probably should have used more play action because Calzada was fantastic throwing with the play fake element, but I think probably no reason to show your entire hand against New Mexico at the start of the SEC schedule coming up. What's a little concerning is you have a young quarterback that does have limitations, and the help around him doesn't appear to be as good as we thought. The offensive line has struggled the last 2 weeks. They're replacing 4 starters from a year ago along that front. They couldn't get any push against Colorado in the ground game. And I know last week you had your starting right guard, Layden Robinson, out against New Mexico, but Calzada was pressured on 47% of his dropbacks. That's ridiculous against New Mexico. And kind of just knowing Jimbo, he is a little bit of a fan of tweaking and getting guys better for the future, and he does hold some things back. Let's hope that's the case, because I see an offense right now that isn't great, right? That's at the national level, the national average in rushing success rate, slightly above the national average in passing success rate, 71st in overall EPA per play, outside the top 65 in both passing and rushing EPA per play. And that's come against Kent State, New Mexico, 2 teams outside the top 115 in defensive efficiency. Colorado, a team outside the top 50 in that regard defensively. Now, this is clearly the toughest test to date so far, right? Like Arkansas, to me, and you kind of hit on this at the top, they have been a pleasant surprise. I always thought the scheme was really interesting and would provide an opportunity to be very good, but now they got a little bulk up front. And I think that's what's allowed them to be a little bit better this year. Right now, though, just stunning. 5th in EPA per play allowed. Top 30 in SP plus defense. Barry Odom is really a well-respected defensive mind. And I listened to Jimbo Fisher's interview on Feinbaum this week. He obviously, just kind of listening to Jimbo over the years, he does praise other coaches, but this was more than usual. And he just really just went on a little diatribe of just lumping on like heaps of praise. And here's the quote on Barry Odom from Jimbo. He makes you dot your I's and cross your T's. He's a zone guy. He's a man guy. He's a blitz guy. He's a third down guy. He's a 4-down guy. And the multiplicity actually makes you think about things as a play caller, but he makes your kids think about things on the field and how you have to set things up. He does a great job of that. So listening to that, and understanding what Zach Calzada is at this point, he is going to have to process pre- and post-snap, and things are going to look different from down to down. That's a lot to ask of a young kid that has some happy feet. And everything that Jimbo said was really accurate. Barry Odom played this like exotic 3-2-6 last season because they didn't have any bodies up front. So Arkansas just said, F it, we're going to go with our best 11, mix up some looks here, confuse teams. And when they turned you over, Arkansas won and competed. When they didn't turn you over, they got beat. But a little bit is changed here. Odom brought in some transfers. He's added some beef along the D line. He can play with more looks, whether it's 4-down linemen or 3-down linemen. We saw Odom already confuse a really young quarterback a few weeks back in Hudson Card. He would rush 3, drop 8. He rattled Card. My guess is Jimbo's game plan would be to run it as much as he possibly can, throw with some play fake elements and some rollouts. And, to me, that's what's ultimately going to come down to this game on the offensive side is Calzada confused, which all signs would point to it's very possible. Arkansas has also been very good on 3rd down, 28% 3rd down conversion rate. So if the added beef helps with stopping the run on early downs, and you're going to have Calzada in 3rd and medium potentially here against a sophisticated defense that's, changing every snap, that's going to be difficult. And A&M to this point hasn't been efficient throwing it. The top two targeted guys in Weidermeyer and Chase Lane, they've got 46% of their targets combined. Lane's averaging 1 yard per route run. Weidermeyer 1.4. Anias Smith is questionable with an injury for this game. Let's monitor that. But the quarterback play hasn't really allowed the Aggies weapons to get really going at this point. And, last week, 3 drops from the receivers. It just feels like a pass game right now, Todd, that's a little bit disjointed. And aside from a couple wide open explosives against inferior competition, it hasn't been all that good.
Knowing Jimbo as well, if there's any uncertainty around his offense, I can't imagine how much time he's going to take before they snap the ball on each offensive series all game long. So,
could be slow.
Yeah, don't expect this game to move at a rapid clip by any stretch of the imagination. But for all the questions we have, Payne, about Texas A&M's offense on a stage against an opponent this good, I think we have a lot more known commodities for the Aggies on the defensive side of the ball. Best defense in FBS, allowing 6 points per game of 4 FBS opponents. Yes, they've only played one Power 5 opponent, but they joined Clemson as the only teams in the Football Bowl subdivision to allow less than 10 points in every game. They've allowed 2 touchdowns all year, but yet to allow a passing score. And when you look at this Arkansas offense, yes, they exploded last week against Georgia Southern, 630-plus yards, their highest single-game yardage total since they gained 661 yards against Mississippi State back in 2016. But let's not sugarcoat anything. If Arkansas is going to be successful, it doesn't hinge on KJ Jefferson trying to do his best Ryan Mallett impressions. It's all about running the football and getting Traylon Smith on track early against his Aggies defensive front.
Boy, did he have a really elongated release. It was like just a wind-up every time Ryan Mallett.
You needed a stop. You needed a sundial to time his release, not a stopwatch.
So you're spot on. You hit it perfectly, and it's A&M's defensive strength right now is defending the pass. The Aggies are number 1 in EPA per pass allowed, so they've been fantastic, not only keeping things in front of them, but limiting the big plays. They're number 1 among Power 5 defenses. Passing success rate allowed, shade over 20%. Again, competition hasn't been great. If you look at KJ Jefferson to this point, overall he's been damn good. The offensive line and his mobility, I think, has left him clean pretty much throughout the season, only pressured on 18% of dropbacks through 3 games. And I think that's something to look for here, is can A&M get pressure while keeping him in the pocket, right? It's one thing to get upfield and get after the quarterback, but you can't let him leak out of the pocket and throw on the run. KJ Jefferson has a 0 passer rating when pressured this year. Both of his interceptions this season have come when he's been blitzed. So it's clear you want to dial up some heat, but you want to do it where you're not just running up the field with a chicken with his head cut off. You just can't be a bunch of banshees out there.
Great show, by the way.
Jefferson, I'm trying to think if I saw that or not.
You did. I don't think you were as big a fan of it as I was.
That's you're probably right. If I can't remember it, you're spot on. So you like that better than Sons of Anarchy, which is
no, I never actually watched full Sons of Anarchy.
You never saw Sons?
How about Billions, by the way? About time they finally got down to the subtext of that plot line that we've been waiting for all these years.
I wasn't going to say anything because I wasn't sure that you had watched yet. You're through the 3 episodes of the continued season.
Yeah, we only have, wait a second. And I know we're off on a tangent, but that's fine. We'll get back to the football in a second. We only have 2 more episodes of this truncated season. I mean, that's the curveball they threw out there.
No. It's not truncated. Remember that this season started like 5 episodes before the Big C hit. So this is the completion of that.
So then we pick up again in the spring under normal schedule.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if it's going to take that long either. It sounded like they had shot the next season while they were completing this season. So I don't know if the layoff's going to be that.
All right,
long.
we got Yellowstone coming up at least. We got Yellowstone coming up at least to fill that void, hopefully.
Your Succession is back as well.
It's a lot going on for me.
That should be coming.
It's a lot for me to try and watch on Sundays, trying to keep tabs on all this football. So it's squeezing in these shows at odd hours of the day.
Yes. All right, let's get back on task here. I think when you look at KJ Jefferson and some of those numbers we just mentioned there, it is important to at least look at both sides of the coin, and he's certainly made strides as a passer this year, but he's by no means great. So a lot of this game basically is what Arkansas has done in the past game. It's either short or it's deep. And that's basically how they've helped KJ Jefferson as a passer. 32% of Jefferson's passes right now are either 20-plus yards downfield or they're behind the line of scrimmage. Jefferson has a 146 passer rating on those two throw types combined. Things get a little more dicier in like the 0 to 19-yard range, which requires you to read and make a decision and get the ball out in time and then throw with accuracy. It's why he's only got a 58% accuracy rate right now. Arkansas, though, is 15th in EPA per pass because they have been explosive. The deep passes have worked. They're right around the national average, though, in passing success rate, which kind of shows you things aren't great down to down for the pass game. A&M secondary probably doesn't get beat all that often deep here. But what is interesting to me, as great as A&M's defense has been, they've been a little leaky defending the run. Obviously, you lost Bobby Brown on the interior. That was a big part of the defense last year. Now with the Rams, A&M 72nd in EPA per rush allowed. They've made some negative plays, created some havoc behind the line of scrimmage, but they've also given up some gashers. In terms of success rate for A&M's run defense, just 2% better than the national average, despite playing offenses that aren't very good. Again, New Mexico, Colorado, outside the top 100 in offensive efficiency. Kent State, outside the top 60 in offensive efficiency. So there is a couple alarming things defensively in terms of being stout enough up front to stop the run. We'll know early on, right? Sam Pittman's got his best offensive line he's had at Arkansas. If the Razorbacks are able to run it, and you have Smith and Sanders, if they're good down to down, then that's going to change the complexion of this game. The run numbers obviously look a little bit better than they are when you incorporate KJ Jefferson runs. Being able to run with your quarterback is certainly an element that is just very difficult for defense to stop. Overall, though, as a team, 53% rushing success rate for Arkansas. KJ Jefferson has a 25% explosive run rate. It's why the Razorbacks are top 40 in EPA per rush. Let's see if you can hit a few explosives here on the ground. I think that's probably where their edge lies. But I think when you look at the entire complexion of this side of the matchup, it comes down to Arkansas being able to run the ball. Because I'm just not sure KJ Jefferson can be a consistent enough passer to drop back and throw it 35 times and beat A&M. And I don't think that's the plan of attack, because you kind of alluded to this. I think A&M kind of slows it down a little bit, tries to run the ball. But it's clear at this stage Arkansas knows its man, and they want KJ Jefferson throwing in that 18 to 25 times kind of region. And if you start pushing him up towards the 35 mark, that's potentially where we see some of these inaccuracies through the air. They
really should do a great job for Arkansas to get Darren McFadden and Peyton Hillis more involved in the offense. I think it'll pay dividends in this kind of matchup.
Peyton Hillis made the Madden cover one year, didn't he?
Yeah, I still have no idea how that happened. I mean, talk about 3 yards in a cloud of dust. The guy was a physically imposing presence, but you never exactly worried about him busting into that second level and wreaking havoc. But
he was the poor version of Mike Allstott?
You know what? I'm trying to think. From an NFL career standpoint, yeah, I guess you give Allstott the nod there. How long did Allstott even play in the league before he had the accumulation of concussions? Did Allstott make the Hall of Fame?
I don't even think. You just made that sound like it was a debate. You're going to make me look this up.
No. Allstott was he was definitely better. I'm trying to think of Allstott. He didn't make the Hall of Fame, did he? I can't remember with him.
Here's what's interesting and why you might have a leg up. You made me look. Allstott never, had a 1,000-yard season. He had a 950-yard season, an 800-yard season. He ended up with 5,100 rushing yards. Now you're going to make me look at this. Peyton Hillis.
Oh, he definitely wasn't a Hall of Famer then. I was thinking College Football Hall of Fame then.
Peyton Hillis. Okay, Peyton Hillis only had 2,800 yards. He just had the
one big season.
2010 breakout season where he ran for almost 1,200 yards, had 11 touchdowns.
Fantasy sleeper back in that day. Fantasy sleeper. No Javonte Williams, but very few men can be when they play in that Denver Broncos offense. All right, 6 games. Man, we covered a lot of ground breaking down some of the matchups. And as we say every week, especially during the month of September, a lot of these teams very much trying to figure out their identities, and it can create some opportunities in the betting markets. You'll see a lot more volatility on these games than you will as things start to progress later in the season. Follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You, of course, can follow me there as well. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. But above and beyond all of that, FanDuel.com/bettheboard. So many great incentives for new users to get involved with FanDuel's great product, whether it's a $1,000 free bet or a 30-1 enhanced odds promotion just in time for Monday Night Football. Put up a little bit, make a lot. All new users have the opportunity to opt into that particular promotion. All right, Payne, it's a time in the show where we run the 2-minute offense and we figure out where we have the most investable opportunity in the college football landscape. Where are our travels taking us this weekend?
The market is definitely tightened, and you can just tell by the overall action early in the week. It's been quiet to this point, from Sunday night now as we record Wednesday morning. Let's go with the total. Let's go to 357 over in Hawaii and New Mexico State. We had a little bit of a depressed total last week in the Hawaii game. We've had a transition with their offense going to a new coordinator, and I think it's taken some time to get things acclimated. And I think both of those situations have created a depressed total here. We haven't gotten the best of the number, but let's go over 61.5 here, Todd. Now, just as a caveat, 62 is a college football total number with relevance. We're looking at games fall about 2.4% on the 62. So getting out ahead of that is vital here. But you know these teams better than I do if you'd like to expound on it.
Yeah, I think when you look at this Hawaii team, you mentioned it, the 17-13 score last weekend in the nightcap against San Jose State, a bit of an outlier. Both teams dealt with some weather. Chevin Cordero wasn't exactly the most accurate and isn't the most accurate passer. They want to try and lean on the ground game. And you talk about an increased level of familiarity between conference foes, but you look at Hawaii when they've stepped down in class against defenses this season. A 49-35 game against Portland State back on Saturday, September 4th, where Cordero was able to get things going in terms of throwing the football and using his legs. And in comeback mode against Oregon State, we saw that game go flying over the total, and the Beavers had plenty of success themselves moving the ball. I think this is the kind of game before you get into the nuts and bolts of your conference schedule where you have to work out all the kinks. And I don't see Hawaii as a 17-point favorite really taking their foot off the gas if they have an opportunity in Las Cruces to get things going. Meanwhile, for New Mexico State, growing optimism that they could get their starting quarterback, Jonah Johnson, back. Not a huge drop-off if he doesn't go. And when you look at New Mexico State, last weekend they put up a crooked number in their own right against South Carolina State. But more importantly, in a game against an in-state rival with a much more defensive posture than anything else against New Mexico, those two teams combined to score 59 points. And I think when you look at the way these teams can move the ball, there's going to be a surplus of big plays. Yes, I know New Mexico State only gained 236 yards there, but I think this will be an opportunity where the Aggies are chasing. They're forced to throw the ball. We get some short fields working in our favor, and this game has some wiggle room to go over the total. One thing, Payne, that I did look up on this because I'm sure our listeners are going to want to try and scramble to watch Saturday night at 8 o'clock Eastern. I'm a little bit concerned that this game is airing on Flow Football. Don't even know what the hell that is, but I encourage all of our Bet the Board listeners, if it's a streaming platform, to all go watch it at the same time and see if we can, crash that server.
Well, you guys enjoy in that endeavor. I am certainly not going to be watching this game. And so I don't have the mental stability to watch New Mexico State football. But to your point, not very good defensively. Right now we have them 106 in the country in EPA per play defense. And I do think Hawaii's offense gets a little bit more on track here. And then I think you kind of hit on the underlying factors that we're going to have a quarterback upgrade here for New Mexico State. So a lot to like about this one. But again, we always say this, the loyalist of listeners have the RSS feed subscribed to. They're subscribed on their favorite podcast platform. And so they're going to get to this game first. And we're at 61.5, which means the next move is taking it to that key number of 62. So it's important to get to this game as early as possible. Yep,
there are some even some 61s out here in the desert. I may have to take full advantage of that before to see what we can pull off. But over rooting for points, New Mexico State and Hawaii. So all of you, our loyal listeners who say we neglect those group of 5 programs, it couldn't be further from the truth. For Payne Insider, I'm Todd Furman. I want you guys to join us as always for NFL Week 3 preview on Thursday. Again, go to youtube.com, search Bet the Board, subscribe to our Bet the Board pregame show, Fridays, noon Eastern. All sorts of increased written content as well available on the Bet the Board website this season. I want you guys to check that out. Support our great writing team that we're continuing to build out one at a time. But most importantly, come Saturday night with a New Mexico State over ticket in your hand, we'll see you at the window.